The desert world stretched endlessly, its sand glowing under the twin suns. Daniel, a human explorer, pulled the scarf tighter around his neck and squinted at the horizon. His boots sank into the dry soil, leaving shallow marks that the hot wind quickly erased. He had traveled to many planets before, but this one felt different. Silent, lonely, and thirsty. He was part of a joint mission between humans and an alien species known as the Aryans. Their homeworld was filled with deserts, cliffs, and dry valleys. Water was rare here, treated like a treasure. The mission's goal was to study survival methods on harsh planets. But Daniel had soon realized that this was more than just research. For the Aryans, survival was life itself. As Daniel walked toward the camp, he noticed movement near a cluster of tall, spiny plants. Curious, he stepped closer. There, crouching on the ground, was a girl unlike any he had seen before. Her skin shimmered faintly like pale stone under sunlight, and her large violet eyes focused intently on the small creatures at her feet. Her clothes were light, woven from desert fibers, and her long hair swayed like thin silver threads in the dry breeze. She looked up when she sensed his presence. For a moment they simply stared at one another, human and alien, both silent, yet curious. "You are the human traveler," she said softly, her voice carrying a gentle tone. Daniel nodded. "And you must be from this world." "My name is Lyra," she replied. Then she looked back at the small creatures near her hands. They were round-bodied animals with soft fur that looked dusty from the sand. Their ears drooped and their tongues hung out weakly. Daniel could tell at once they were thirsty. "Are they pets?" Daniel asked, kneeling beside her. Lyra stroked one gently. "Yes. They are called Sela. They are gentle creatures. They do not hunt. They do not fight. They only live beside us. But now, they are dying." Her voice cracked slightly, though she tried to remain calm. Daniel studied the Sela carefully. Their fur had lost its shine, and their tiny eyes looked dull. He had grown up with pets on Earth, a dog, a cat, even a small bird once. He knew the look of animals in distress, and these little ones were close to the edge. "Do they have water?" Daniel asked carefully. Lyra shook her head. She held up a small clay container, tilting it so he could see inside. Only a few drops shimmered at the bottom. "It is all I have left, my people. They say water must be kept for us, not for them. They told me to let them go." Daniel's chest tightened. "And you don't agree?" Lyra's violet eyes met his. They were filled with quiet sadness. "They are my friends. I raised them from birth. To leave them now would be to break a bond I cannot break." The desert wind blew between them, carrying dry heat that burned his throat. Daniel took a sip from his own flask. It was not full either. The mission had warned them. Conserve every drop. Out here, one careless choice could mean the end. Still, he could not look away from the Sela. Their soft paws twitched weakly in the sand, and their breathing grew shallow. He felt a pang deep inside, something human, something simple. On Earth, even in the hardest times, people gave water to animals. Children left bowls out for strays. Farmers carried buckets for thirsty horses. To him, it was natural. But here, on this planet, the rule was different. Survival of the people came first, and creatures like the Sela were left behind. Daniel knelt lower, resting on one knee. "Lyra, how long have they gone without water?" 2 days, she whispered. "Too long." Daniel looked down at his flask again. He had enough for maybe one more day if he was careful. His throat was dry already, and the heat pressed heavily on him. But his eyes went back to the Sela, and he felt that familiar tug, the human instinct to help, no matter the cost. He poured a small trickle from his flask into his palm. Lyra's eyes widened in surprise, watching as he held his hand out. One of the Sela slowly lifted its head, weak but curious. It pressed its small mouth against his hand and lapped up the water eagerly. The others tried to follow, their tiny tongues brushing against his skin. For a moment, Daniel forgot the heat, the thirst, and the warnings of the mission. All he saw were little lives fighting to hold on. Lyra gasped softly. You gave them your water? Just a little, Daniel replied. It won't save them, but it might give them a chance to wait a little longer. Her eyes shone in a way he could not describe. No human has ever done this before. My people, they do not understand such kindness. Why would you risk your water for them? Daniel hesitated. He thought of his dog back on Earth, how it had run to him every day after school, tail wagging, eyes full of trust. He thought of the time it had fallen sick, and how his family had cared for it day and night until it recovered. Love for animals was not logical. It was not measured by survival or rules. It was something deeper. They deserve to live, he said simply. Life deserves a chance. Lyra stared at him for a long time. The wind moved her silver hair across her face, but she did not brush it away. Instead, she smiled faintly, though her eyes still carried worry. You are not like us. You are different. Daniel gave a tired smile. Humans are strange that way. The Sella curled weakly against Lyra's lap, some of their strength returning from the small water he had given. But it would not last long. The desert sun continued to blaze above, and Daniel's flask felt lighter than ever. He knew he had made a choice, and he knew the cost. Still, as he looked at Lyra and her pets, he felt something stir inside him. Maybe this was why humans were here, why they traveled across the stars. Not just to explore, but to share something no other species seemed to understand. As the suns began to sink, casting long shadows over the desert, Lyra looked at Daniel, with quiet hope. But he could see it in her eyes. She feared the night would come, and with it the end for her beloved pets. And Daniel knew he could not let that happen. The suns rose higher the next morning, painting the desert sky in harsh gold. Daniel woke with his throat dry and his lips cracked. The heat of this world never waited. It attacked as soon as daylight returned. He reached for his flask, gave it a shake, and frowned. The sound was faint, almost empty. He sat up slowly, brushing sand from his clothes, and glanced toward Lyra. She was already awake, sitting cross-legged beside her cella. The little creatures huddled close to her legs, still weak but alive. Their fur looked a little brighter, and Daniel knew it was because of the water he had given yesterday. Lyra noticed him watching. They made it through the night, she said softly, stroking one of the animals. Because of you. Daniel smiled faintly. But they'll need more today. A few drops won't last long. Her smile faded. She lifted her clay container, tipping it carefully. Only a thin trickle of moisture slid down the side. This is all I have left, she whispered. My people refuse to give more. They said the Sela are not important. Daniel could hear the quiet pain in her voice. She loved these creatures deeply, but her people saw them as a burden. To them, water was life, and life meant survival of the Aryans, not their pets. He looked at his own flask again. Less than half remained. Enough to keep him alive for one more day if he was careful. But if he shared again, it would not be enough for him. He closed his eyes, taking a slow breath. Lyra noticed his hesitation and quickly shook her head. Do not give more, she said firmly. You need it. You are not like us. You are far from your world. If you fall, there will be no one to save you. Her words were honest, but Daniel could see the way her hands trembled as she held her pets close. She wanted to tell him not to give, yet her heart screamed for help. He had seen that same expression on Earth. Farmers during droughts, families, during hard winters when people tried to hide their fear but could not hide their love. Daniel stood and scanned the horizon. The desert stretched endlessly, but he refused to accept there was no hope. Maybe there's water somewhere nearby, he said. Plants like these, he touched one of the tall, spiny stalks. They must store it, maybe underground. Lyra tilted her head, curious. You think you can find water where we have searched for years? Humans are stubborn, Daniel said with a small smile. Sometimes we see things differently. He spent the morning moving between rock formations, digging shallow holes, and examining the roots of desert plants. The Aryans had long believed water could only be collected from deep wells or stored in clay, but Daniel thought perhaps small pockets of moisture existed closer to the surface. He remembered stories of Earth explorers in deserts, how they found hidden springs or drew water from unexpected places. Lyra followed him, carrying two of her pets in her arms while the others hobbled beside her. Her eyes stayed on him, puzzled but hopeful. Hours passed and the sun beat down without mercy. Sweat soaked Daniel's shirt, and his mouth felt like sand. Each hole he dug revealed only dry soil. Each plant he cut open was empty inside. The world seemed to mock his efforts. Finally exhausted, Daniel sank to his knees. His hands were raw and his head throbbed. Lyra placed a hand gently on his shoulder. Enough, she said softly. You tried. That is more than anyone else. Daniel looked up at her. The Sela lay weakly at her feet, their tiny chests rising and falling with effort. He felt anger rise, not at Lyra, not at her people, but at the thought that such innocent creatures would die simply because no one would try harder. He reached for his flask again. Only a quarter full now. His hand shook as he opened it. Lyra's eyes widened. No, she whispered. Do not do this again. You will harm yourself. Daniel didn't answer at first. He poured a thin stream into the cap of his flask and set it on the ground. The Sela stirred, noses twitching, and slowly dragged themselves toward it. They drank greedily, their weak bodies trembling with need. Lyra's face was filled with both relief and worry. Why? She asked again. Why do you give what you cannot afford? Daniel's voice was low, tired. Because I can't just watch them die. On my world, we don't abandon those who depend on us. Even in hard times, we share. Her violet eyes softened, glistening in the light. You are strange, she whispered. But perhaps strange in a way we need. The day dragged on. Daniel forced himself to rest under a rock ledge, trying to ignore his dry throat. Lyra stayed beside her pets, whispering to them in her language, a gentle rhythm that sounded like a song. The Sela calmed, their small bodies curled against her. But Daniel could feel the weight of what he had done. His water was almost gone and the desert stretched endlessly around them. He had given hope to Lyra and her pets, but at the cost of his own safety. As the suns began to sink, the air cooled slightly. Daniel sat staring at the horizon, lost in thought. Lyra moved closer, her pets nestled safely in a small blanket. She studied him carefully. You risk too much, she said quietly. But your heart is strong, perhaps stronger than even your body. Daniel gave a weary smile. Maybe. But hearts don't last long without water. She looked away, guilt flickering across her face. He could see it. She wanted to ask for more, but her pride and kindness held her back. She would rather suffer with her pets than watch him collapse. That night, Daniel lay awake under the stars. He thought of Earth, of rivers, lakes, and rain that fell freely. Here, water was more precious than gold, and yet he had poured it out for creatures not his own. Some would call it foolish, others might call it weakness. But to him it was the only choice. As the stars glittered above, Lyra whispered softly beside him, almost as if speaking to herself. Maybe humans are here to teach us something we forgot long ago. Daniel closed his eyes, his throat aching, but a faint smile touched his lips. The struggle was only beginning, and he knew tomorrow would demand even harder choices. The morning suns climbed once more, painting the desert with light that shimmered like fire. Daniel lay on the sand beneath a rocky ledge, his body weak. His lips were dry, his eyes heavy. and every breath came slow. The single flask that had once held his water now hung empty at his belt. Beside him, Lyra kept watch. She had not slept. Her pets, the Sela, rested against her, alive but still fragile. Their fur had regained a little shine, but their strength was thin. They survived only because Daniel had given them his last water. Lyra's heart ached as she looked at him. She remembered how her people spoke of humans, curious creatures, clever, but often reckless. Yet she had never imagined one would give away life itself for the sake of small animals. His act was beyond logic, beyond rules. It was sacrifice. When Daniel stirred, she leaned close. "You must not move," she whispered. "You are too weak." He gave a faint smile. "Still alive, aren't I?" His voice was little more than a whisper, but there was humor in it. "Barely," Lyra replied, her eyes shining with worry. "You should have kept the water. Why did you not?" Daniel's gaze drifted to the Sela, curled together in her lap. Because they needed it more. And because it was the right thing to do. Lyra pressed her hand to her chest. His words were simple, but they struck deep inside her. To her people, right and wrong were decided by survival. But this human followed something else, something unseen yet powerful. She knew what she had to do. "I will go to my people," she said firmly. "They will not want to listen, but I will make them. You gave your life for the Sela. I will not let it end here." Daniel closed his eyes, too weak to argue. "Do what you think is right." Lyra walked for hours across the desert, carrying her pets in a sling close to her chest. When she reached her village, the people gathered to see her. They saw the Sela alive, moving weakly but breathing. Their eyes widened in surprise. "How?" one elder asked. "We told you to let them go. There is no water to waste." Lyra lifted her chin. "They live because of the human. He gave his last water to them." A ripple of shock spread through the crowd. Murmurs rose, some confused, some angry, some curious. "Foolishness," another elder said sharply. "The human wastes what he needs to live. Why honor such a choice?" Lyra stepped forward, her voice steady. "Because he did what we would not. We call ourselves wise, yet we abandon life when it becomes difficult. He gave, though he had nothing. Is that not greater wisdom?" The elders exchanged uncertain looks. They had never been challenged this way. Their laws were ancient, water for the people, and only the people. But here was proof that another way existed. Lyra placed her pets gently before them. "Look at them. They breathe because of him. Tell me now, was his act foolish? Or was it noble?" The crowd grew silent. Some lowered their eyes, unwilling to answer. Others whispered to one another, questioning quietly what they had always believed. Finally, the oldest elder, her voice rough like the desert wind, spoke. "The human chose with his heart, not his mind. And yet perhaps the heart has its own wisdom. We cannot let him die after such a gift. Bring water." Gasps rose from the people. Sharing water with an outsider was rare, almost unthinkable. But the elder's voice carried weight, and no one dared oppose her. Lyra's own eyes filled with relief. She bowed deeply. "Thank you. I will take it to him at once." She hurried back through the desert, carrying a clay jar filled with precious water. Her arms trembled, not from the weight but from urgency. She reached the rocky ledge where Daniel lay and rushed to his side. "Daniel," she whispered, kneeling beside him, his eyes opened slightly, tired but still alive. "You came back," he murmured. "I brought water," Lyra said quickly, lifting the jar. "My people agreed to share it, because of you." She tipped the jar gently, letting a thin stream touch his lips. Daniel drank slowly, each swallow giving him a spark of strength. His chest rose more steadily, his eyes clearing. He let out a long breath. "Never thought water could taste so good." Lyra laughed softly, though tears touched her cheeks. "You nearly left us. Do not do such a thing again." Daniel smiled faintly. "No promises." She shook her head. but her heart was light for the first time in days. The Sela stirred, sniffing at the jar, and Lyra gave them a small share as well. They lapped eagerly, their tiny bodies warming with new life. For the rest of the day, Daniel rested, slowly regaining his strength. Lyra sat beside him watching the desert sky, her thoughts heavy but hopeful. "My people saw your sacrifice," she said at last. "They did not understand it at first, but I think they will never forget it. You showed them something we had lost." Daniel tilted his head. "What's that?" "Compassion," she replied softly. "The strength to care even when it hurts." He was silent for a moment, then nodded. "It's what makes us human. Maybe it's what makes us alive." Lyra smiled, her violet eyes warm. "Perhaps it is what will make us better." That night, as the stars spread across the desert sky, Daniel lay awake, his body still weak but his spirit steady. He thought about Earth, about rivers and oceans, about how humans sometimes forgot the value of water because it was everywhere. Here, in this desert world, he had learned its true worth, not just for himself but for every living creature. Beside him, Lyra whispered to her pets, their small bodies safe in her arms. She looked at Daniel and felt something new: trust. He had given more than anyone else ever would. He had given his last drop, not for glory, not for gain, but simply because it was right. And in that act, he had changed her people. The desert morning arrived with no kindness. The suns rose quickly and the heat returned like a heavy blanket. Daniel woke with his tongue dry and his body weak. He sat up slowly, every movement a reminder of how little water he had left. He reached for his flask and shook it. Only a faint sound came from inside. He opened the cap and looked in. Barely a mouthful remained. His chest tightened. One mouthful of water was not enough for a human in this heat, and it was not enough for Lyra's pets either. He turned his head and saw Lyra sitting with the Sela. She held one close to her chest, stroking its dusty fur, while the others lay weakly around her. Their eyes were half closed, their breathing slow. Lyra's face carried quiet sadness, but she did not speak. She knew the truth. Her pets were slipping away. Daniel stood and walked a short distance, staring out across the endless sand. His thoughts were heavy. He remembered the warnings of his mission leader. Do not waste water. Every drop is life. He remembered the rules of survival. Conserve, ration, endure. But when he thought of those rules, his mind filled with the image of the Sela's small bodies, thirsty and helpless. A war began inside him. One side whispered, "Keep the water. You need it to live. Without it, you will fall, and no one will save you." The other side whispered, "Share it. They are alive too. You cannot watch them die while holding water in your hand." Daniel clenched his fists. He was not afraid of danger. He had faced storms, hunger, and loneliness on other worlds, but this choice was harder than any danger. It was not about fighting. It was about deciding what kind of person he was. Behind him, Lyra spoke quietly. "Daniel." He turned. She met his eyes, her violet gaze calm but full of worry. "Do not give more," she said. "I saw what you did yesterday. You weakened yourself. If you fall, it will be my fault." He shook his head. "It's not your fault. You didn't ask me." "But I wanted to," she admitted, her voice soft. "I wanted to beg you for water. But I could not. I knew it would hurt you. I cannot take more from you." Daniel walked closer, kneeling beside her. The Sela stirred weakly, their noses twitching, at the scent of his flask. They were too weak to rise, but he could feel their silent plea. He thought of his dog back on Earth, the way it had once looked at him during a hot summer, tongue out, eyes begging for relief. That memory burned inside him now. Lyra touched the side of the flask. "Keep it," she whispered. "If you give it away, you will not last the day." Daniel looked at her, then at the Sela, then back at the empty horizon. His throat ached. His body cried out for water, and yet his heart cried louder for the creatures before him. He closed his flask and tied it to his belt. "I'll find more," he said firmly. "There has to be something here we missed." Lyra frowned. "We have searched this desert for generations. Do you think you can do what we could not?" Daniel smiled faintly, though it was tired. "Humans are stubborn, sometimes too stubborn for our own good." For the next hours he searched again. He climbed rocky hills, checked dry stream beds, and dug holes in the sand. He looked at the spiny desert plants and cracked their stems, hoping for moisture, but nothing came. His skin burned under the suns and his hands grew blistered from digging. Lyra followed at a distance, carrying one of her pets in her arms. She said nothing, but her eyes never left him. She saw his determination, and though she thought it hopeless, she also felt something stir inside her, a quiet respect. Finally, Daniel collapsed onto the sand, his breath ragged. His vision blurred. His throat was fire. He could not deny it anymore. There was no water here, not in the surface, not in the plants. Lyra hurried to him, kneeling by his side. "Enough," she said, her voice breaking. "Please, you will kill yourself for nothing." Daniel opened his flask again. His hand shook as he looked inside. That last mouthful of water glistened at the bottom. He stared at it for a long moment. Then slowly he poured it into the small cap. Lyra gasped. "Daniel, no." But the Sela stirred, their noses twitching again. One by one, with weak movements, they crawled to the cap. Their tongues lapped eagerly at the small pool, drinking every drop until the cap was dry. Daniel watched them, his heart aching but also relieved. At least for this moment, they had life. Lyra looked at him with wide eyes, her voice trembling. "Why? Why would you do this? You will die without water." Daniel's lips were cracked, his voice weak, but he answered simply, "Because I can't do nothing. Because life, any life, deserves a chance." Her eyes filled with tears. For the first time, she saw the truth of the human heart. Her people had always said survival was only for the strong. But this human, weak and thirsty, had given what little he had to save small creatures. It was something her people would never understand. The sun sank lower, and the desert cooled. Daniel lay back on the sand, his body trembling with exhaustion. Lyra sat beside him, her pets curled safely in her arms. She looked at him with a mixture of fear and wonder. "You are not like us," she whispered. "You are more." Daniel closed his eyes, too tired to reply. His body screamed for water, but his heart felt strangely calm. He had made his choice. As the stars appeared above them, Lyra looked at him again. "Tomorrow, I will go to my people," she said softly. "They will not listen easily, but I will tell them what you did. I will make them see." She pressed a hand gently against his arm. "Hold on, Daniel, please, you gave them life. Now I must fight to give it back to you." The desert was silent around them, but inside Lyra's chest burned a new determination. A human had given his last water to save her pets. She could no longer accept the way her people lived. She would make them understand, even if it meant standing against their oldest laws. And so, under the cold stars, a promise was born. The next morning, Daniel and Lyra set out toward the cliffs where the silent well was said to lie. The desert stretched endlessly around them, golden and harsh under the rising suns. The air was dry, and every step burned their feet. But they moved steadily. The Sela, carried carefully in a sling by Lyra, seemed to sense the journey's importance. Daniel's body still felt weak from the days without water, but his spirit was strong. The thought of proving humanity's compassion to the Aryans gave him courage. He knew that survival alone was not enough. True life was measured by the strength to care. Lyra walked beside him, her eyes scanning the rocky cliffs ahead. "The elders said it is dangerous," she reminded him. "The well may be empty, or worse, hard to reach." Daniel nodded. "Then we will reach it together. That is enough for now." The cliffs rose before them, jagged and imposing, Large boulders blocked some paths, and narrow ledges tested their balance. Daniel moved carefully, each step a struggle against fatigue. Lyra held his arm when the terrain became steep, guiding him over the trickier parts. The Scylla nestled closer to her chest, sensing the tension in the air. Hours passed. The suns climbed high, and the heat pressed down relentlessly. Daniel's lips were cracked, his throat parched, but he refused to give in. Every step reminded him of the water he had given to the Scylla and the lesson he hoped to teach. Finally, after a difficult climb, they reached a narrow ledge where the entrance to the silent well gaped like a dark mouth in the cliff. The walls of the rock were streaked with pale minerals, evidence of long-forgotten moisture. Daniel looked down into the darkness. "This is it," he whispered. "Let's see if life still lingers here." Lyra nodded. "Be careful. The stones are loose and the shadows hide dangers." Together they carefully descended into the well's cavity. The air inside was cool and still, a sharp contrast to the desert heat above. The floor of the cave sloped gently toward a small basin. Daniel knelt beside it and peered into the shallow pool. His eyes widened. Faint water shimmered in the dim light, reflecting the opening above like liquid silver. Not much, but enough. Enough to prove that compassion and courage could create hope even in the harshest places. Lyra gasped softly. "You found it." Daniel smiled, though he was too tired to speak fully. "It's not much, but it is life." He dipped a small stone cup into the pool and lifted it to Lyra. The Scylla sniffed curiously, recognizing the scent of water. They lapped carefully from the cup, gaining small strength with every sip. Daniel filled the cup again for himself. The water, though scarce, revived him slightly. He looked at Lyra. "This is more than survival. It's proof that life is worth fighting for and worth giving to others." Lyra nodded. Her eyes glistened. "And your choice. It has changed, more than you know." When they returned to the village, the elders were waiting. The entire community had gathered, their faces filled with curiosity and uncertainty. The Scylla trailed beside Lyra, their small bodies now stronger and more alert. Daniel stepped forward, holding the cup of water from the silent well. "This is what I came to show," he said clearly. "Life exists even in the hardest places. Water is precious, yes, but compassion is stronger. We must share it even when it is hard." The crowd fell silent. Some looked at the Scylla, some at Daniel, some at Lyra. The act of carrying life from the well had shown them a truth that words alone could not convey. The oldest elder, her eyes softening, rose slowly. "You have risked much, human," she said. "And yet your strength comes not from force nor from rules, but from your heart. Perhaps we have been wrong. Perhaps life is measured not only by survival, but by care." Another elder stepped forward, his voice low. "The Scylla live today because of your courage. Your people, human, have a lesson for us. We have been harsh, blind to what matters. Today you remind us of our forgotten ways." Lyra looked at Daniel, her eyes shining with pride and gratitude. "They understand now. You have given more than water. You have given hope." Daniel shook his head slightly. "I did not do this for praise. I did it because it was right. But if it changes your world, then that is enough for me." The elders nodded, and the villagers began to murmur quietly among themselves. Families gathered their own clay containers and brought water to the Scylla and to Daniel, offering small acts of care they had not shown before. Children ran forward, curious and brave, asking if they could help. The Scylla, once weak and fragile, explored their surroundings, hopping lightly and sniffing the air. They had survived not by rules or tradition, but because one human had chosen to give all he had. That night, Daniel sat outside his tent, the stars stretching endlessly above. Lyra joined him, her hand brushing his. "You are remarkable," she whispered, "not because of strength or speed or skill, but because of what you carry inside." Daniel smiled faintly. "Humans are like that. We may be small and fragile, Compared to some worlds, but we have hearts that give even when it hurts. Lyra leaned closer. You gave your last water to save my pets, and yet you live. You have taught us more than any law or story could. He nodded, tired but content. Sometimes it is the smallest acts that matter most. Water, a hand, a choice. These can change everything. The villagers watched from a distance, many whispering stories to one another. The elders had begun to reconsider old rules. They saw now that survival alone was not enough. Compassion could guide them, just as Daniel had guided the Sela to life. In the days that followed, Daniel helped the Aryans learn new ways to gather water from the desert. He taught them patience, care, and the value of sharing. Lyra remained, close, her violet eyes filled with admiration. Together they explored the deserts, finding hidden springs and small pools that had been overlooked. The Sela grew strong and playful, a living symbol of what humanity could inspire. The silent well became a sacred place not only for the water it held, but for the lesson it symbolized. A human had come and risked his life to save creatures that mattered to others, teaching the Aryans the meaning of true strength. And in that desert world, far from Earth, humanity's legacy began to grow, not through force, not through conquest, but through simple, quiet acts of compassion that echoed louder than any command. Daniel looked at Lyra and the Sela, smiling under the twin suns. He felt a warmth deeper than any water could provide, the warmth of hope, of life, and of the knowledge that sometimes one person's choice could change the world. The desert village of the Aryans stirred with whispers. Word of the human sacrifice spread from tent to tent, from family to family. Some called him foolish, others called him noble, but none could deny the truth. The Sela were alive only because of him. Daniel sat near the fire at the edge of the camp, recovering slowly. His face was pale, his lips cracked, but his eyes had regained strength. The water Lyra brought had saved him, though he still felt weak. He drank carefully, taking only enough to live, leaving the rest for Lyra's pets. Lyra sat beside him, her violet eyes bright with both pride and worry. She had never seen her people so unsettled. Their rules had guided them for centuries. Water was life, and life belonged only to their kind. But Daniel's choice had broken that rule, and now the elders demanded answers. At sunset, a messenger came. "The Council of Elders calls for you," he said, his voice stern. Lyra rose quickly. "I will come with him," she replied. The messenger frowned. "This is no matter for you, Lyra. It is about the human." Lyra's chin lifted. "It is about us all. I will not leave him." The messenger hesitated, then nodded. "Very well. Both of you come." The council chamber was a large round tent made of woven desert cloth, its walls painted with old symbols of survival. Inside sat 7 elders, their faces lined with years of heat and hardship. They were the keepers of the law, and their words carried the weight of tradition. Daniel entered slowly, leaning on Lyra's arm. The elders watched him in silence, their eyes sharp and unreadable. At last, the oldest elder spoke. Her voice was steady like stone shaped by wind. "Human, we have heard what you did. You gave your last water to creatures not your own, risking your life. Tell us why." Daniel looked at her, his throat dry but his voice firm. "Because they were alive. Because they trusted Lyra. Because I could not watch them die when I had something to give." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. One elder shook his head. "Foolishness. Water is life. To give it away so freely is to throw life into the sand." Another leaned forward. "Or perhaps it is something more. Perhaps he sees life differently than we do." The first elder scoffed. "Compassion is weakness. Without rules, we all die." Lyra stepped forward, her voice clear. "No, compassion is not weakness, it is strength. Look at the Sela. Look at Daniel. His act gave them life, and it gave us a lesson. He showed us that survival without kindness is empty. The room grew tense. The elders rarely allowed challenges, but Lyra's words carried fire. Daniel took a slow breath, forcing himself to stand straighter. On my world, we have a saying. The measure of a people is how they treat the smallest lives. If we only protect the strong, then we are not truly living, we are only surviving. To be alive means to care even when it costs us. The oldest elder studied him for a long time. Her eyes were sharp yet thoughtful. And yet human, your body weakens. Your sacrifice almost ended you. If Lyra had not begged us, you would be gone. Do you still call this wisdom? Daniel met her gaze. Yes, because I would rather risk myself for others than keep everything only for me. That is what makes me human. Silence filled the tent. The elders looked at one another, their faces torn between doubt and curiosity. They had lived by rules carved in stone for centuries, rules that said compassion was dangerous. But this, human, fragile and foreign, stood before them alive because of the very compassion they rejected. At last, another elder, younger and less hardened, spoke quietly. Perhaps we have forgotten something. Long ago, before the droughts, our ancestors shared freely. It was only when the water grew scarce that we closed our hands. Maybe the human reminds us of what we once were. The oldest elder frowned but did not argue. She turned back to Daniel. If compassion is your strength, then prove it. Not with words, but with action. Daniel raised his eyebrows. What do you mean? There is a spring, she said slowly. It lies deep in the cliffs, guarded by danger. We call it the Silent Well. It has been dry for many years, or so we believed. But recently, scouts reported faint moisture there. If you can find water and bring it back, then we will believe your way has worth. Lyra's eyes widened. That is too far, he is still weak. The elder's voice was firm. Then let him refuse. But if he accepts and succeeds, his compassion will not be called foolishness again. It will be called strength. Daniel looked at Lyra, then at the elders. His body ached, but inside his chest, a spark burned. He had come this far not just to survive, but to show that life meant more than rules. I'll do it, he said simply. Lyra's hands clenched at her sides. Daniel, he gave her a tired smile. You said your people needed to see. This is how they'll see. The elders nodded. The decision was made. The trial would come at dawn. That night, Lyra sat with Daniel outside the tent, her pets curled beside them. The stars spread wide above, silent and endless. You should not have agreed, she said softly. You are too weak still. Daniel looked at the stars, his expression calm. Maybe. But sometimes the only way to prove something is to risk everything. Lyra shook her head. You are strange, human, strange and stubborn. Daniel chuckled weakly. That's what keeps us alive. She studied him for a long moment, then placed her hand gently on his. Then I will go with you. If you fall, I will not leave you behind. Daniel met her gaze, her violet eyes glowing faintly in the starlight. He nodded. Together then. And, in that moment, the bond between them was sealed. Not just human and alien, but two souls united by compassion and courage. The desert wind carried their promise into the night, while the silent well waited in the cliffs, holding secrets of life and hope.